Excited to see everyone here today. My name is Danielle, and I am one of the moderators for today's session. I am also the Community Engagement Manager for Red Rover, and I currently work alongside both Gabbie and Tia to manage our Don't Forget the Pets collaborative project. And I will hand it over to Tia to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I am Tia, and I also work with Danielle and Gabby. I am the outreach manager at Red Rover, and we partner with Greater Good Charities on our Don't Forget the Pets project. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm very excited to get to introduce our colleague and friend, Gabbie Leister, who is the Senior Program Manager for Human Service Shelter Renovations at Greater Good Charities, where she leads initiatives that help domestic violence and homeless shelters safely accommodate pets. With 8 years of experience in animal welfare and shelter renovation, Gabbie has worked on projects spanning animal shelters and human service shelters nationwide. She holds a degree in animal science and brings a strong foundation in animal care, welfare, and behavior to all of her work. For the past 3 years, Gabbie has been a contributor to the Greater Good Charities and Red Rover collaborative project, Don't Forget the Pets, partnering with human service shelters to design and implement pet accommodations tailored to each organization's unique space, resources, and their community needs. She works alongside Greater Good Charities shelter renovation team, which brings decades of experience in construction and animal welfare, and has supported human service shelters in accommodating pets since 2011. And I will hand it back to Tia to share a little bit more about today's session.
Yes, so today's session is titled Sustainable Pet Inclusion: Simple Solutions That Last. Creating pet inclusive sheltering does not have to be complicated or costly. This session highlights practical, low, and no cost strategies that help shelters design and sustain pet accommodations without overwhelming staff or budgets. Participants will explore real world success stories from partner shelters that have implemented simple, effective changes to keep families and their pets together. The presentation will emphasize how to build and maintain sustainable programs by leveraging community partnerships, maximizing in-kind donations, and embedding pet inclusion into existing operations. This session is ideal for organizations seeking realistic, scalable approaches to pet inclusion that can be implemented right away.
And with that, Gabbie, our presenter for today, please take it away.
Thank you, Danielle and Tia, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I'm just gonna get right into it. And so thank you, Danielle, for that introduction. And so, like Danielle and Tia said, I get to work pretty closely with them on a daily basis through our Don't Forget the Pets coaching program. And we can talk a little bit about that later, but as a quick introduction, like Danielle said, I'm the Senior Program Manager of Human Service Shelter Renovations at Greater Good Charities. And just a little bit more detail about the shelter renovation work we do at Greater Good Charities is that we've completed 215 shelter renovations to create pet accommodations since 2009. We started out primarily working in animal shelters, and that's where our expertise was in. And then we slowly started seeing the need for pet accommodations in human service shelters. And so that's when we started working with human service shelters to help them create pet accommodations. So we complete 5 renovations a year at human service shelters, and we partner with a bunch of amazing organizations like Red Rover, Purina, PetSmart Charities, and more. So to begin, I'm just going to go over the session overview for today. And so we're going to be taking a deep dive into why pet inclusivity matters. We're going to talk about low and no cost strategies. I'm going to highlight some real world shelter examples from shelters that we've worked with in the past few years. And then we're just going to go over some next steps so that if your shelter or your organization's interested in creating some more pet accommodations, we can talk about what that might look like for you. All right. So first, we're starting off with why pet inclusion matters. So, pet inclusion strengthens outcomes for people and shelters. So, we really want to support both ends of the leashes. We want to support the pet owner as well as the pet. And so, in these different times, you might see where pet inclusivity is really important when you are giving services to people. So, when domestic violence survivors are seeking safety from an abusive situation, when people experiencing homelessness are seeking shelter, in extreme cold and hot temperatures when unhoused people need temporary shelter, during times of disaster when families with pets are temporarily displaced, and when people are seeking essential services and need a safe place for their pet to stay. And so, a lot of our experience at Greater Good Charities is working with domestic violence shelters, and we slowly started expanding that to other human service organizations. And we realized that the importance of being able to accommodate pets is just as important at a domestic violence shelter as it is at a homeless shelter or any other organization that is helping people access care. So first, I'm going to go over some of the common barriers that we see arise when we're talking to shelters that we're working with about pet inclusivity and what pet accommodations look like at their organization. So the first one that comes up is budgetary constraints. So that might be, what do we need to allocate for pet food? How much do we need to allocate for vet costs, supplies? For staff bandwidth, people might ask who will be taking care of the pets, who will be cleaning up after them. For safety and liability, people may ask what happens if there's a dog bite incident. What if someone leaves their dog behind? Allergies, people may ask what if someone does not feel comfortable staying in shelter if they are allergic to dogs or cats? And then staff and board buy-in. Some people might say that their staff thinks it's too much added work, or they just don't like pets, they don't like being around dogs, and that can also create some barriers. So I know this might all sound daunting, but I can confidently say that we have worked with shelters who have come and overcome these barriers in many different ways. And so they're definitely common barriers that people see, but there's definitely a lot of ways to solve them. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to touch upon all the different ways that you can tackle these barriers. All right, so we are going to start off with policy and planning. So sometimes people don't enjoy policy and planning because it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of talking. But this is one way that comes to no cost to your organization. So, one of the first ways you're going to come at this is by thinking about creating a pet coalition within your organization. So, a lot of shelters that we've worked with through our coaching program, and if we're doing a renovation for them, they've seen a lot of success when they create some sort of pet coalition within their staff and their board, which is just created of people who are stakeholders in the pet program at the organization or people that are just interested in supporting the idea. And it's a great way for you to bounce ideas off of one another and to just talk about all the fears you have, all of the great successes you've heard about people starting pet programming so that you can really talk through all of your concerns to make the best pet program possible. The second most important thing is to lean on your community partners. And I'll touch on this a little bit later in the organization, but it's really important that shelters who are looking to accommodate pets realize that they don't have to be an expert in sheltering their residents as well as being an animal welfare expert. So it's a lot easier to lean on your community partners like your local animal shelters, local veterinarians, local groomers, and dog trainers to get that insight that you might need for accommodating pets so that you feel comfortable and confident about having a safe pet program. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about that a little later. The third thing you're going to want to look into is important documentation. So I have some examples listed here, such as partner agreements, intake forms, pet parent evaluations, shelter resident agreements and expectations, and consent and release forms. on our Don't Forget the Pets website, we have a robust document library of examples that shelters have used for their successful pet programs. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of times, if you reach out to another shelter that is also already accommodating pets, they're always happy to share the forms that they use. And so this is something that can really make or break having a sustainable pet program, but it also doesn't take too much work because you can lean on the people before you who have created this pet programming. All right. And so now we're going to dive into some no-cost design solutions. And so this is Greater Good Charity's expertise when it comes to the Don't Forget the Pets coaching program. We really like to highlight the importance of being proactive with your design of your space so that you can make sure that you have a safe plan for the pets that are staying at your shelter. So the first thing I'm going to go over is allowing pets in room with the pet owner. So this kind of goes back to one of those common barriers, which was staff bandwidth. So one of our favorite methods of housing pets is in room with the pet owner because it's very similar to what the pet owner was most likely doing when they were living with their pet before they were seeking shelter. So when the pet's in room with them, there's none of that out of sight, out of mind. The pet is taking, or the owner is taking care of the pet themselves, and it alleviates the stress on your staff. So that's the first way that you can kind of overcome one of those barriers is to keep the pet owner with their pet, and it just alleviates some of that work for your staff. The second thing you're going to want to look into is revisiting the traffic flow of your shelter. So if you're designing a new shelter, that's perfect because you can look at the floor plan that you're creating and you can be proactive right from the start. But this is also super helpful, even if you already have an existing shelter, to just look at the way that your traffic flow is for pet owners and pets and to see how you can avoid some unwanted dog interactions. So if you look at the bottom right here, you can see that there's a floor plan of a shelter. So this shelter was actually one of our coaching recipients. And so this was the layout an architect had drawn up for them. And if you look closely, you can see there's two bedrooms right next to each other. And then right across from there, there's a open air kitchen and a living room. And so one way that you can be proactive about this when you're creating a floor plan is to maybe move the rooms that are going to be pet friendly to a more quiet and separate part of the building. So for example, one of the shelters we've worked with had a wing of their building that had an exit at the end of it. And so they put the pet-friendly bedrooms at the end of that hallway. So that way, when residents had to take their dog out to use the bathroom or go on walks, the dogs were going directly outside and they didn't have to walk by any common areas. You didn't have to worry about children having unwanted interactions with the dogs, or if there were shelter residents that were fearful of dogs, you wouldn't have to worry about that. This can also be helpful with allergies as well. If you kind of push the pet-friendly areas of your building to the side or to by its own exit, you won't have to worry as much about that cross-contamination. And another point with this floor plan as well is when dogs are staying in bedrooms, if their pet owner is out for the day, whether they're at work or going to an appointment or a meeting, if dogs are alone in the room and then the bedrooms are directly across from a living room where there might be children playing, whether it's just a children play area or, loud banging in the kitchen, that might be very stressful for dogs who are staying in the bedrooms by themselves. So it could be a good idea to, when you're looking at your layout, avoiding things like that so that you can lower the stress of the pets, which would lower any damage they might do to the rooms. It would lower stress-related illnesses, and it would just help you be proactive about creating a sustainable pet program that you feel good about. So the next thing I'm going to go over is sign usage. And so this is another great low cost or no cost option. And sign usage is really important for keeping the safety of your shelter when you have pets in-house. And so signs as simple as putting a sign on a bedroom where there might be a dog free roaming in there. So if your staff is doing room checks, they would probably like to know if when they open the door, if a dog is going to be out of a crate. So having signs like that could lessen stress for your staff. You could also use signs to direct flow of traffic. So if you want your pet owners to be walking a certain way or down a certain hall when they're exiting, you can have signs that tell them where to go. We've even used cute little paw print stickers on the floor to show people where to go with their pets. So there's a lot of different ways you can get creative with that, and it doesn't have to be super expensive. Um, Signs can also be great for outside if you want them to be using certain areas for dogs to be relieving themselves, or if you want certain areas to be off limits to pets, such as communal areas or living room spaces, kitchens, things like that. All right. And so the next thing I'm going to move on to is utilizing existing unused space. So a lot of shelters, when we first start working with them, they might say their shelter is so small, there's absolutely no place where they can, renovate it to be usable for pets. And to that, I say, you should let us come look at your shelter because we have come up with some very creative ways to create pet accommodations in existing unused space. And for example, I think I have the photo later in the presentation, but we have turned larger unused closets into visitation spaces. So if a shelter has a kennel building on site, but they wanted a room for the pet owner to spend time with their pet, they've created a nice, durable, easy to clean space for them to do so with a little couch and enrichment, things like that. People have also turned unused closets and offices into cat rooms where they put a few cat kennels in there. And you can even use unused space for storage rooms. So there's a lot, the opportunities are endless, and the more creative you get, the easier it will be to use that existing space within your shelter. And the last thing I'm going to talk about on this slide is utilizing pre-existing donations. So there might be a lot of things in your shelter that you already have donated that would be great for creating different solutions for creating safe pet spaces in your shelter. So one example would be on the top right corner here, we have a wired dog crate. And so these things are great for shelters that are accommodating pets inside. It's a great place for pets to decompress. It's a great option to have if your survivor needs to leave the shelter for whatever reason, if they're going to a doctor appointment, to work, and they want their dog to be in a crate. These are very handy. And so if you have a lot of extra towels, a lot of extra sheets, those can be a great way to create a crate cover. And it just gives that pet a little bit more of a sense of safety and allows them to be a little bit more calm. And so these are a really great option, a great way to use a donation that you might already have or you might already have a lot of. The second thing that I was going to mention is baby gates, and I believe we have a photo on the next slide of those. And so baby gates are great because it is an easy way to create a double containment for your bedroom. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have staff that are going to be doing room checks and the resident might not be in the room at the time, having a baby gate on the door is a simple way to allow an extra level of security. So when the staff member opens the door, a dog can't just dart out. And so oftentimes these are pretty easy to get donated. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of in-kind donations a little bit later in the presentation, but this is a great thing to ask for to add to your shelter. Super simple, super easy to install, and it just adds a layer of safety and will end up creating a more sustainable pet program in the long run. Some other options I have here are the wired dog crates on the bottom left. So like I mentioned before, these are a great versatile tool to have on hand. We also have the tiered cat cages, so you can see that on the bottom right. And so the tiered cat cages are very similar to the wired dog crate, in which it's a great place to safely put the pet in a secure area when the pet owner is not on site. And then on the top right there, we have a litter hider. So you guys might be familiar with that, but this is just a nice little option we like to include in our renovations because it's not just an open litter box on the ground. And so if the room is shared between two different families or two different survivors, it's just a nice way to keep it a little bit more private, a little bit more clean. And typically the cats are okay with it, but it's just a tool, so you don't have to use it. Um, and then going down the list on the right here for other low-cost design solutions, we have removing carpeting. So removing carpeting is a big one for us at the shelter renovation team. We always say the first thing if a shelter is worried about allergies is to rip out any carpeting you have in your shelter because that will trap allergies, pet dander, and so taking that out is a great way to make the space a little bit more cleanable and durable. So removing carpeting is a great volunteer project. And once you remove that carpeting, we also suggest you install some waterproof LVT flooring or LVP flooring. And so this can also be a great volunteer project if you have some handy volunteers in your community. And it's also just a nice material because it's easy to clean, it's waterproof, you won't get pet dander stuck in between the creases. And it just gives you peace of mind that you don't have to worry about any damage from pets living in the rooms. All right. So we're going to move on to in-kind donations. And so in-kind donations and in-kind labor is super important. And so I highly encourage as a low-cost solution to, renovating these spaces. Once you go through this presentation and you start getting ideas for your shelter, the first step you're going to want to do is reach out to your local stores, your local business owners, and see if you can procure some in-kind donations and labor. So a lot of times when we're reaching out to local contractors when we're planning a renovation, oftentimes when we tell them the story about how we are creating pet accommodations in a human service shelter so that people can seek safety with their pets, they're most often very excited about either donating the materials or part of the labor for the work they're going to do. And so when you're reaching out for these donations and when you're reaching out for, quotes for renovation, make sure that you're telling your story and make sure that you're explaining the importance of people and and their pets staying together because I think that's really powerful and impactful and a great bridge to people understanding what your organization's mission is. And then going down the list again, we have our baby gates, which I mentioned. Cat shelving is a great way to add enrichment easily into your shelter. So if you have a few bedrooms that you're labeling as pet friendly and you're holding to the side for any survivors with pets, a nice easy thing to add to those rooms would be cat shelving. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Um, you can buy cat shelving online that's easy to install into the wall. You can build cat shelving yourself. There's a lot of DIY tutorials about it. It's a great volunteer project for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts to build the cat shelving for you. But it's just a great way to add some enrichment into the cats' lives that are staying at your shelter. We have our litter hiders, which I mentioned earlier. And then I will discuss visual barriers. So visual barriers are an important thing to consider. I'm going to go back to the other slide after this, but these are two examples of visual barriers at a shelter. So this was a domestic violence shelter we had done a couple years ago. And on the left side, you can see there's some privacy slats and that chain link fence. And so we often recommend incorporating privacy slats in a play yard if there are going to be children walking around the yard or if you want to have that privacy option for the survivor and their pet. So you want that play yard to be an area of decompression. And so sometimes it's nice to have that visual separation so that they can spend time with their pet alone. But then it also is a great way to keep children safe from pets so that they're not sticking their fingers through the chain link fencing. Some other ways you can also avoid that is by using privacy fencing, such as wooden fencing or vinyl fencing, so you don't have to worry about that at all. On the right side here, this is that same shelter that we did a renovation at. And so this shelter actually had one wing that was dedicated to pets. And so the end of the wing was where the pet-friendly bedrooms were. And then on the other side of this half wall that we built was actually the children's advocacy wing. And so that was just how the shelter was set up. They had to keep the children advocacy wing there. And so we built this 4-foot visual barrier wall. Obviously, it wouldn't fully stop a child from being able to open the door and go through, but it at least allowed for a little time delay. So if there were children in the hall and there was a pet owner walking with a dog, or if a dog got loose, there's that safety barrier so that you don't have to worry about any unwanted interactions. So something as simple as this could be a way to take a existing part of your building and make it usable for pets. And I'm going to go back to my last slide here, actually, and I'm going to talk about dog doors. So, dog doors are another easy solution to creating a more pet inclusive space in your shelter. So, if you have bedrooms that are on the first floor of your shelter, something that we often do on our renovations is we will put a hole in the wall and we will put a dog door there. And then on the other side of the wall will be a small chain link pet relief area. So, you can see that on this picture to the right, and then also the bottom picture on the left. And so the reason why we like doing this is that these pets are obviously owned pets. They've most of the time are housebroken, and so we want to keep those good habits. And so having this option for them to be able to go outside if their owner's not home or if their owner's working, it will keep their house training intact, but it will also allow for, the peace of mind of the pet owner. They don't have to worry about their pet peeing in the room while they're gone. And it also just will alleviate any stress of the pet if they are inside for too long. So we highly recommend this option. They're super easy to install. On the left side here too, you can see that's kind of what a dog door would look like inside. And so we use a specific door that you can also lock for security reasons. And so there's a lot of great options out there for different dog doors that you can use. And we did that already. All right. And so a few more low-cost design solutions we have here are air purifiers. So air purifiers are a great thing to add to any pet-friendly room. It's great for alleviating allergens in the air. Another way that you can be proactive about your shelter layout is if you're worried about allergies and, a shelter resident coming in and maybe they're super allergic to pets and they're stressed about coming into shelter because they know there's pets living there. We often recommend that you hold 1 or 2 rooms aside that never get touched by a pet. So a pet never lives in there. And that way you can give that peace of mind to a shelter resident that's coming to seek safety, but may not want to live in a room where a pet may have been. But air purifiers are a great way to reduce allergy worries. Washable rugs are also really great. There's a lot of great options out there for those. And then, of course, choosing durable materials. So, whether you are just starting to construct a new part of your shelter or if you're looking at ways to renovate your current shelter, things to think about are having washable flooring, like I mentioned earlier. I'm happy to give out product recommendations as well if anyone has any questions about that. We also like to recommend PVC trim. So PVC trim also holds up really well to a lot of cleaning and sanitizing. You don't have to worry about mold. So we really like to use those in our renovations. And then also sometimes we will use FRP wall coverings. And so FRP wall coverings can either go 4 feet up the wall or it can go full 8 feet up the wall. And it's just a really durable, easy to clean material. And so if you have a part of your shelter where you expect to have to clean it a lot or you expect a lot of foot traffic from pets there, it's a nice, easy addition to that room so that you don't have to worry about the materials of the wall or the floor degrading. All right. And so now I'm going to highlight a recent renovation we did. This was a domestic violence shelter that wanted a little pet relief area that was dedicated for pets and pet owners. And they didn't have much space to do this, but they did have this corner of their yard. And so all we had to do for this part of the renovation was simply put one run of chain link fencing here, and then they just used the existing fencing all the way around as the other sides of the play yard. And then we just put some gravel in there to make it easy to clean and easy on the dog's paws. And it was just a really simple way to incorporate a pet relief area, a play yard without having to take up too much space. So that's another common thing that we hear is that shelters don't think they have enough space for play yards or pet relief areas, but you really don't need anything too big to be able to let a dog off leash, let them relieve themselves, or just let them relax and play with their owner. And then we also have some low-cost design ideas for the outdoors for those play yards. So enrichment is so important, especially for dogs that are going through a traumatic event. They need to be able to play and they need to be able to decompress. And so making DIY dog enrichment like this is super fun. It's a great volunteer project. It can be super cheap. A lot of times when we do this for one of our renovations, we will get tires donated for free from a local tire place. And so things like this are also just a great way to create some good options for the pets at your shelter. All right. And so now we are going to take a deep dive into operations. And so we went over, being proactive with policies and documentation. We talked about some of the ways you can start looking at your shelter and seeing what small things you can change to make it a little bit more pet inclusive. And so now we're going to look at different things that you can change operationally. So the first thing you're going to want to do is establish some pet care protocols. And so this is something you're really going to want to lean into your pet coalition for, or you're going to want to lean on to your animal welfare um, local organizations to talk about what this looks like for you and your shelter and your residents. You're going to want to also lean on volunteer engagement. And so I know one of the questions I think I saw earlier was about staff bandwidth. And I think leaning on volunteer engagement is a super easy way to get people involved with your organization. They might not understand, you know, people going through a homeless experience or through domestic violence, but they do understand the love of a pet. And I think it's a great way to get people involved and to help out with things that you need at your organization. The next thing you're going to want to work on is simple sanitation procedures. So just what you're going to want to expect your shelter residents to do when they have pets living in house. If you have a external kennel building, you're going to want to think about what kind of sanitation procedures you want for that as well. And that's just another thing that you can lean on your animal welfare organization partners for to see what they recommend. And then I just wanted to remind everyone, you're going to want to start small and then scale up. So it might seem overwhelming if you try to incorporate all of these new ideas all at once. But if you can make one small change every day in your shelter to make it a little bit more pet inclusive, eventually you're going to have a very sustainable, very strong pet program so that you can properly support your shelter residents and their pets. All right. And now I am going to roll into some success stories. And so these are all shelters that we have done renovations for. So they came to us and they did not have pet accommodations originally. So we looked at their shelter, reviewed their space, worked with them to see what makes sense for their organizational needs, and then we came and did the renovation. And so this was a domestic violence shelter in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so on the top left here, you can see that was one of the pet-friendly bedrooms. And simply all we had to add to those rooms, since they already had cleanable flooring, was we added some cat enrichment. In that top left picture, you can see we got a crate with a table cover on top of it so that since the crate was pretty big and taking up a lot of space in the room, they were still able to put stuff on top of it to use for storage. We also added catios to this shelter. So on the top right picture here, you can see in the window there's a little cat door there. In the next slide, I'll show you what those catio boxes look like on the outside. But that's just another easy way to add on to your existing space. But it gives a little bit of an extra piece for any cats that are staying at your shelter. On the bottom left here, this was an unused office that we turned into a storage space. And so we put some metal storage racking in there, and then we were able to tuck away all of their pet supply donations they received. And then on the bottom right here is that visual barrier I spoke about earlier that divided the child advocacy hall from the pet friendly hall. And then on the outside, this is that same shelter. We have the catio boxes, which is just a great addition for cats. Cats are very prone to stress-related illnesses. And so it's really important that we consider that when we're designing these spaces that cats might be living in. And then this shelter also opted for building a day kennel. So they had a day kennel building, which would be primarily used for when shelter residents were leaving site to go work or to go to appointments. They could put their dog in these day kennels, so that they had peace of mind that they were in a safe and secure area. And so the top left there is the inside of that kennel building. So it was very simple. It was chain link kennels with a drain in each one to make it easy to clean. Those wall coverings are those FRP wall coverings I mentioned earlier that are super easy to scrub. And then we also included that PVC baseboard trim. All right. And moving into success story number 2, this is a homeless shelter that we worked with in Los Angeles, California. And as you can see, we really didn't need much space to create their pet accommodations. So we have this small room that we had turned into both a cat holding room and also for dogs. And so on the right side, we have our cat kennels. On the left side, we have our dog kennel. So they really didn't need a lot of space to be able to accommodate the pets there. You can see there's a drain on the floor, so it's easy to clean and sanitize in between pets living there. And then on the left here, we created a little dog relief area with a double containment so that dogs can't easily dart out. All right. And then our third and final success story. So this was actually one of our most recent renovations that we did. So at this domestic violence shelter, they were not comfortable with housing pets inside. And so we created something that we call pet retreats for them. And so their side yard was completely open, and we dropped this prefabricated shed here. On the top right, you can see this is what it looked like when it first got dropped off. So it was just a framed shed. And then we came in and added insulation, drywall, the FRP wall coverings, proper flooring, and we created basically a real life room for pets to live in. And so these rooms also had a pet relief area included in them. So you can see that in that left picture there. So dogs were able to go in and out of the pet retreat as needed. We would put a topper on the top of this little pet relief area so that they don't have to worry about dogs jumping out. Um, and yeah, they would have HVAC, they would have electric. So it's a great option for shelters who don't feel comfortable housing pets inside, but still want to offer some kind of pet accommodations for their residents. All right. And now we are going to circle back to what I mentioned earlier and talk about leveraging community partnerships. So now that you've seen all the great ways that you can accommodate pets in your shelter, it's time to start thinking about the little ways that you can start making it a reality. And so leveraging your community partnerships is going to be super important so that you are not burning out your staff, you're not burning out your resources. And so, different community partnerships that you can lean on are local businesses for in-kind donations, veterinarians who can help you with low-cost vet services, or even if you just need someone to consult with on a pet problem at your shelter. Animal shelter and rescues. So oftentimes animal shelters will get tons of donations of fluffy toys or fluffy dog beds that aren't suitable for a dog living in a shelter situation. But it could be perfect for an owned pet that's living with their owner. And so that's a great way that you can get some pet supplies for low cost. You can also lean on volunteer groups for help with renovations, for supply donation drives, local schools and colleges for the same thing. Boarding facilities. I actually have an example picture in one of these slides of a domestic violence shelter that we worked with recently who got cat crates donated from their local boarding facility. So they simply got some new ones and they didn't need the ones they had, and so they donated it to them. And that's just one way to get something that could be very expensive for very cheap or for free. And then you're also going to want to lean on your community experts. So your groomers, your dog trainers, they're always willing to help and they're a great resource so that you don't feel like you have to be the dog or cat expert when you start allowing pets at your facility. All right. So now we're going to get into maximizing in-kind donations. So I mentioned that a few times throughout this presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, this is an example of the shelter that we worked with that had gotten donated crates from their local boarding facility. So they came a little bit, dirty and tattered. They're definitely used for a while. We cleaned them up, we repainted them. We also added cat portals in between them so that you can expand them and make them bigger. So if there's only one cat at a time, the cat can have full run of the crates, or if you had multiple cats, you can kind of close it off. We have a great DIY video on how to do that on our website as well if you're interested in that. But yeah, and then we added that butcher block on top, so it just made it look like a little bit more of a neater space, but it was still donated items. So a great steal. So you're definitely going to want to lean into your local organizations, lean into your local animal shelters to see if they have crates that just don't work for them, use kennels, things of that nature. For pet supplies, you can reach out to your local store. So you can reach out to your local Tractor Supply, Walmart, Target. Sometimes if they have long dated items that they can't get rid of, they're happy to donate them to a local community organization. Pet food, same thing. If you reach out to your local Walmart, Tractor Supply, sometimes animal shelters will get donated food that might be, the bag might be a little open, or they might have taken one scoop of food out, but the animal shelter can't use it, and it's still good for your shelter. So definitely lean onto your community partners for that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, donated fencing, donated labor for different renovation projects. Definitely just ask questions and see if anyone in your community is willing to help you out, because we definitely get a lot of people that are happy to help in those kinds of situations when we're doing renovations. Another unique one is donated washing machines. So a lot of times we'll recommend a shelter that is housing pets to have a separate washing machine from the one that everyone else is using. And so that's just a way to separate that allergy concern again. So if all The pet owner's belongings and sheets and things like that are going in a separate washing machine. It's just another added layer of safety between people who are allergic to pets and people who aren't. And so reaching out to local businesses who sell things like that, they might be able to sell you something for a lot cheaper, or they might be able to give it to you for free. Definitely look into DIY enrichment. There's a ton of great, fun volunteer projects for DIY enrichment, like making dog toys, cat toys. We've had someone volunteer for us who had knitted blankets for pets, things like that. And as I said before, it's just a great way to bridge that knowledge gap for people who don't understand what it might feel like to go through crisis, but they understand the love of a pet. And so it's a great way to get them involved in your organization. All right. And then my last two things here are Amazon wish lists. Those are a great way to get donations from your community that are a little bit more siloed in what you are asking for. And then donation drives as well, getting your community involved in supplying your pet supply room so that you will have a more sustainable pet program. And then we are going to wrap it up shortly. Our one of our last slides here is embedding pet inclusion into your existing operations. And so you don't, like I said earlier, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's ways that you can simply include this in your already created operations. So an example of that is cross-training your staff. And so training your staff on the importance of keeping people and pets in crisis together, training them on some simple animal welfare tips, and then also working with your local animal shelter to train them on the importance of trauma-informed care and things of that nature. You're also going to want to incorporate pets into your safety planning, and you're going to want to integrate pet intake with your standard client intake. So always ask about pets. Even before you start accommodating pets, it's important to ask about pets to see what the need is in your community. And then all that to say, I know I gave you guys a lot of information today, but there is a ton of support available out there. If you have any specific questions, you can visit the Greater Good Charities exhibitor booth and you can send me a message personally if you are interested in anything I talked about today. There's a ton of support out there for in-kind donations, renovation grants, there's resource libraries. Don't forget the Pets offers a one-on-one coaching program. And then I also have some websites listed here, such as My Dog is My Home, who has great resources about supporting people and pets in crisis. And then my key takeaways after today is that pet inclusion does not have to be expensive, that it is super important to lean on your community partners, that small operational changes can make a huge difference, that partnerships and donations can sustain programs, and to remember to focus on taking small steps and then to just talk about all the things you learned today and all the things you're hoping to do for your organization. So talk to shelters at different stages of pet programming, talk to your staff and board about it, to your shelter residents, and talk about their feelings on pet programming, your feelings on pet programming, and you'll be able to come to an agreement on how you can accommodate pets within your shelter. And that is all I have for today. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Gabby. That was great. I know we already have quite a few questions in the Q&A, so I want to roll right into that. But yes, if you have additional questions that you would like to ask Gabby, please enter it in the Q&A section on your Whova screen, and I will hand it over to Tia to share some of the questions that we've already received as you're presenting.
Awesome. Thanks, Danielle. And amazing job, Gabby. Not surprising. You're just the best. We have a lot of really great questions. So thank you everyone for popping those in the Q&A. I'll go ahead and get us started off. So the first question is, what are some realistic low-cost strategies that shelters can use to successfully maintain pet inclusive programs over time?
Awesome. Great question. So I think that some of the most sustainable ways that you can have a successful pet program is to really lean in on your policy and procedure, which is shocking for me to say because I love the design process of pet programming, but I can definitely see that shelters who really talk about all the different parts about pet programming and openly talk about it with their shelter staff, with their residents. I think that they have these successful programs because they have that, strong foundation going into it. So that would be my first answer for that one.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabby.
Yeah.
Next question. How can smaller shelters build partnerships for pet support if they do not already have strong animal welfare connections?
Great question also. I would suggest just cold calling shelters and, showing up in person. I think all it takes is finding that one right connection at a shelter or at a veterinary clinic, or just anywhere in your community that's involved with animal welfare. It's really important that you meet face to face and you tell them about why you want to be able to accommodate pets. And once you find that one person that, shares that idea with you, I think it'll be really easy for you to find that partnership.
Great. I'm going to actually jump down to a question that was just asked because it's pretty similar. So, what are some other strategies to gain low-cost vet care for clients when the initial outreach to local vets wasn't successful?
Very good question. So I would say definitely reaching out to all different kinds of veterinary organizations is important. So you have your local vets, you have your private vets, your clinics, but then there's also certain veterinary organizations that offer specifically low-cost vet care, or they might work with a specific shelter. Um, Even animal shelter vets sometimes are willing to help out with things like that. So I think reaching out to some of the more unique organizations would be a great next step for finding um, some more partnerships in that field.
Excellent. Thank you, Gabby. I'll also just throw in there for folks to reach out to their veterinary coalitions. So see if there are any veterinary coalitions in your state, in your county, or in your region. Just doing a quick Google search and send an email out there, find them on Facebook, and see if you can join a local meeting or virtual or in person, and start that line of communication where everyone's kind of together in a bigger group.
I love that. Thank you, Tia.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Great question. So, are there populations that are still being unintentionally excluded, even in pet inclusive models?
Interesting. So I think I would need more clarification on populations, what they mean by population specifically.
I think we might have it enabled for folks to come off mute. If anyone's comfortable and would like to chat about it, you're welcome to do so. I think when I first read this question, I thought about folks who have issues gaining transportation,
Right.
um, language barriers, folks living with, a chronic illness. Um,
Yes. Yeah, and I think along those lines, there's definitely a ton of gaps out there for different, gaps to getting access to services. One thing that we sometimes try to incorporate into our renovations is ADA accessibility as well. So that's just another example. So I do think there are still populations that are unintentionally being excluded. And I think talks like this are a great way to um, kind of brainstorm on how we can continue to close that gap for access to care.
somewhat on a similar topic there, but how should shelters measure whether their pet inclusive approach is actually working?
I love that question. I think the best answer for that is to talk to your shelter residents and talk to the people that are seeking shelter with pets and see if they're feeling supported. Because there really is no one size fits all. There's no scale to follow, or boxes to check about if you are pet inclusive or not. I think the most important thing is to just, take it step by step and continuously survey your pet parents to make sure that you are meeting their needs. Because I think there's going to be an ever-growing need for pet housing, and then also the needs of pets are going to be constantly changing. So I think just having open conversations is the best way to measure that.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, it sounds like a very client-centric approach, which I think is really important. Okay, switching it up a little bit, do you have a PR kit for education when folks are trying to get their local shelters to become open to being inclusive? So this attendee is in the Coachella Valley, so out by Palm Springs, and within 50 miles of them, they have zero pet inclusive or pet accepting shelters.
Wow, yeah. I can't say I have a PR kit prepared, but I'm gonna give a shameless plug to the Don't Forget the Pets website because we have a lot of great resources on there that are educational to that point to kind of show shelters that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and there's a ton of resources out there. On our resource library, we do link to a lot of different organizations because there's so many great organizations out there that their whole mission is to support, people and serving pets. So there's a lot of support out there. I actually want to ask Danielle, do you have any additions to that as the outreach manager?
I don't. We have not yet created sort of like a single document that encompasses everything that you might want to share with your community stakeholders about why pet inclusive sheltering is important. But yes, like Gabby said, our Don't Forget the Pets website has a lot of those resources so that you can find pieces to tailor that conversation once you sort of figure out what the major barriers are for whoever it is that you're talking to. But we have a lot of resources. My Dog is My Home has a lot of resources. And not for nothing, I think I can speak for at least the three of us here today. We would also be happy to join you for any of those conversations. We are often asked to hop into Zoom calls with community stakeholders to talk about these programs and talk about how they've been successful at other shelters throughout the country. So Gabbie, Tia, and myself are always happy to do that if that would be of assistance to you.
Yes, please reach out to us. And I think Shoshana just put in the chat that My Dog is My Home has a one pager on how to make the argument for co-sheltering. And she put her email
Awesome.
address in there as well.
That's
So
amazing.
it is, yeah. We are almost at time, so I'm going to put one more question, and I think this question is definitely one right up your
Ooh.
alley. Do
Yes, I
you
love
have
a trick question.
recommendations for removable cat shelves or cat towers that can be reused for different pets and different families? And are carpeted towers safe if you're sanitizing between pets?
Wow, I love that we're ending on a design question. Um, to answer the second part of the question first, I think that there are ways to sanitize carpeted towers, but it's hard to make it completely sanitizable just with that type of material. So we do recommend if you're worried about that cross-contamination or if you're trying to use one piece of enrichment for multiple pet families, to use something that's a little bit more cleanable like metal or plastic. We do have a design actually that we've used for renovations that is a metal shelf attachment that goes into the wall. And then it has a removable cat scratcher that you can put in, and then you can take it out and put a different one in. And so I'm happy to share the model of that, or we could potentially even talk about, donating some to your organization if you're interested in that. But it's a great option for being able to change those out in between families. Because otherwise, we would probably recommend you would just change it in between families so that you're not using the same one. So I would recommend leaning onto in-kind donations for that, using a durable material, or you can reach out to me and I would love to nerd out about the cat scratchers we created for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabbie. Well, we are at time today, folks. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and a extra special thanks to Gabbie and My Dog Is My Home for hosting today. We will be closing out this Zoom session, so please enjoy the rest of the conference. It was wonderful to see you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Chasing